you're transforming the graph of a function by reflecting over an axis. You're basically going to be looking at reflections across your x-axis or your y-axis. So when you have a reflection across the x-axis, these values below the x-axis will now be flipped over, like you'll see a mirror image, and it'll come down here and it'll go right along here. Okay, and then likewise you're going to take this value that's above the x-axis, and now it's going to be flipped over, and you're going to have a mirror image here along the x-axis. Okay, and so if you're going to reflect something across the y-axis, there's your mirror image is going to be across the y-axis. So you're going to take this value here and have a mirror image going across on the other side of the y-axis. So that's what it's going to kind of look like. Okay. Now, when you're looking at this, this is kind of actually, not kind of, this is basically communicating that information to you. So when it says y equals f of x, and then it says now graph y equals f of the opposite of x, basically what it's telling you to do is that your input is changing from x to the opposite of x, but you're going to have the same y value. Okay? So let me kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So let's say that, let's take this point when x is 4, y is 2. Well, now we're saying, hey, when you put in a negative 4, the opposite of your x value, your y value is going to be the same thing, so it's going to be a positive 2. So it would be right along here. So this is going to end up being the reflection across the y-axis. Okay? So your the opposite input is going to have the same output. That's kind of what that means right there. So here's another example of that. If you click on the More button, okay, you can see here that when x is 4, y is 2 was part of our graph. And then if you take the opposite, right, when x is negative 4, y is 2. And then you can kind of see this happening too. When x is 1, y is 1. You take the reflection of that by going when x is negative 1, y is a positive 1. Okay. Now you can see here when they're asking you to find y equals the opposite of f of x, what it's telling you is your x value is staying the same, but your output is going to be opposite. Okay, so let's look at an example of that. So this is easier to see here on this graph. I think it makes a little more sense here. So when x is a negative 2, your original function, you got a 4 back. The opposite of f of x would be a negative 4. Okay, I like to look at the graphs of these. So here, when I have x is 2, y is 4, if I want to do the a reflection across the x-axis, I'm looking at the opposite of f of x. And that's what this is going to be. So when x is 2, now y is going to be a negative 4. When x was a negative 2 in my original function, y was a positive 4. And so now, remember, it's the y value that's changing. So when x is a negative 2, now it's going to be a negative 4. Okay, so it's going to reflect across this x-axis. So now, basically, instead of trying to memorize which one is which, I would just look at this and say, okay, x stays the same, but f of x represents the result, or the output. So that's your y value, but my y value will change signs. Okay, and then apply that to your graph. And then when I'm doing this y equals f of negative x, I need to think x is changing, and the output will stay the same. The y value will stay the same. That way you don't have to memorize a whole lot if you can understand what this is communicating to you. you have less things to memorize. Okay, so you can see here in this example, this was the original graph, okay, and they asked you to obtain the graph of y equals f of the opposite of x, right? So you can see here at -2, 0, if you change the input, excuse me, I said that wrong. At 0, -2, if you change the input, you can't really take the opposite of 0, so it stays the same at 0, -2. And then this point here, which was 2, 0, change the x value to a -2, 0, and plot that. And then pick another point over here. So here's 4, 2. Again, change the x value from 4 to -4, and the y value stays the same at a +2. Okay, so you can kind of go through there and just pick some points. 6, 4 becomes a -6, +4. 7, 3, change the x. X becomes a -7. Y stays 3. And there's your reflection across the y-axis.